60,000 golf carts and a mortality rate nobody talks about out loud. That's the Villages, Florida, the largest retirement community on Earth, where the streets were engineered for leisure, and the statistics tell a different story underneath the surface. But the Villages is just one entry on a list of 13 places that each, in their own way, broke the idea of what a city is supposed to be. Not because of war, not because of natural disaster, because the founding concept itself turned out to be wrong, or too bold, or too frightening, or simply too human to survive contact with reality. Consider the pattern. A Chinese developer builds a Parisian cityscape in an empty field outside Shanghai, complete with a 200-meter Eiffel Tower, and it stands nearly empty for years. An Italian Renaissance fortress of perfect geometric form gets populated not by willing citizens, but by criminals resettled by the state. A Soviet oil city rises from the Caspian Sea on the hulls of sunken ships. A Nazi seaside resort stretches 4.5 kilometers along the Baltic coast and never hosts a single guest. A Burmese military junta builds a capital with a 20-lane highway and almost no cars to fill it. An anarchist desert settlement operates without water infrastructure, legal addresses, or governing authority. In each case, someone had a blueprint and a grand idea. In each case, reality pushed back. The 13 places in this series are not cautionary tales in the simple sense. They don't reduce to hubris failed. They're more uncomfortable than that. Kowloon walled city held up to 50,000 people in a footprint of 119 by 213 meters under no legal jurisdiction, and it functioned. That forces a question about what cities actually need in order to work. And the answer turns out to be far stranger than any urban planner has been willing to admit. There is a version of Paris in China. It has an Eiffel Tower, 108 meters tall, wide Haussmann-style boulevards, ornamental fountains, and sculpted gardens. No one built it as a joke. Someone built it to sell apartments. Tianducheng, developed on the outskirts of Hangzhou in Zhejiang province in 2007, ranks 13th among the most discussed urban planning experiments of the 21st century. And the reason is simple. It is the most unambiguous evidence we have that prestige, not culture, drove China's real estate boom. The developers spent hundreds of millions of dollars constructing a near replica of central Paris across roughly 1 square kilometer of Chinese soil. The target population was 10,000 residents. For years, a few hundred people actually lived there, and the empty avenues beneath a replica iron tower became one of the defining images of China's so-called ghost cities, places built ahead of demand in the expectation that demand would eventually arrive.
Why did this happen? China's middle class was expanding at a pace that made conventional planning almost impossible. Developers built entire districts on speculation, and Western aesthetics, particularly European architecture, functioned as shorthand for quality and aspiration in marketing materials. Copying Paris was not a cultural statement, it was a pricing strategy. The European facade added perceived value, the same way a foreign label does on a consumer product. The outcome was a city district born without citizens, generated by market logic rather than human need. What makes Tianducheng more than a footnote is what happened next. By the mid-2010s, the district began to fill in, not with the upscale residents originally envisioned, but with a steady mix of locals, wedding photographers, and tourists who found something genuinely compelling in its uncanny familiarity. A ghost city that refused to stay a ghost. That tension between the calculated artifice of its origin and the unexpected life it eventually attracted is what makes Tianducheng a precise diagnosis of its era and a useful place to begin counting. In Brøndby-Havby, privacy is not a choice. It was simply never built in. That is not a complaint from residents, it is an architectural fact. This is number 12 on our journey, and it may be the most deliberate experiment in enforced togetherness that was ever drawn on a map. Brøndby is a garden city on the outskirts of Copenhagen, designed in 1964 by landscape architect Erik Mugind. The plan is a system of perfectly concentric circles, circular plots, circular footpaths, a circular central square at the heart of it all. Every house faces inward toward its neighbours, not because residents chose that orientation, but because the geometry leaves no alternative.
Viewed from above, the settlement looks less like a neighbourhood and more like a diagram from a textbook on ideal human society. Clean, symmetrical, exact. The intention was openly utopian. The social optimism running through Denmark in the 1960s held that architecture could do what culture and goodwill sometimes could not: force people into genuine community. No fences were part of the design, no blind corners, no recessed doorways, no hedges tall enough to disappear behind. The plan ensured that every garden could be seen from every other garden. Residents describe the result plainly. Everyone here knows everything about everyone. They do not mean it loosely. They mean it as a statement about load-bearing walls and sight lines. And this is where Mygind's Utopia becomes something harder to classify. When a physical space is engineered so that solitude is geometrically impossible, the distance between neighbourly warmth and architectural surveillance shrinks to almost nothing. The beauty of Brøndby is genuine, the symmetry is immaculate, the gardens are tended with quiet devotion, the overhead view is close to mesmerising. But beauty and coercion are not opposites, and this place holds both without resolving the tension between them. What happens when an architect decides, at the drawing table, exactly how human relationships should be structured? From the enforced closeness of Danish circles, we move toward another kind of enforced closeness, one shaped not by design, but by the land itself. A city with no money, no religion, and no nationality, and it actually exists. That's Auroville, number 11 on our list, and the gap between what it claims to be and what it actually is makes it one of the most fascinating social experiments on the planet. Founded in 1968 in Tamil Nadu, southern India, Auroville was never meant to be a commune or an ashram. Its founding charter declared it a place belonging to no single nation, governed by no faith, free from the logic of capital. Representatives of 124 countries arrived at its inauguration, each carrying soil from their homeland, pouring it into a marble urn as a gesture of symbolic unity. The call came from a woman known simply as the Mother, spiritual successor to philosopher Sri Aurobindo, whose mystical philosophy of human evolution underpins everything here. The land itself told a harder story. Centuries of deforestation had turned the Tamil Nadu plateau into cracked red dust. Early settlers planted over 2 million trees by hand. At the centre of the planned city stands the Matri Mandir, a golden sphere roughly 36 metres across, clad in nearly 1,400 gilded discs. Inside, a pure white meditation chamber receives a single beam of sunlight focused onto a crystal globe. It took more than 30 years to build. The surrounding city was designed as a spiral galaxy capable of housing 50,000 people. Today, around 3,000 live there. The contradictions run deep. The city without money runs on an internal accounting system. The city without religion was built around one man's specific spiritual doctrine. Tamil farmers whose land was acquired, sometimes forcibly, spent decades in legal and social conflict with the community. Inside Auroville itself, governance disputes, accusations of cult-like insularity, and arguments over who qualifies as a genuine resident have never fully resolved. UNESCO and the Indian government both offer official support. That legitimacy coexists with the grievances. Auroville is real, green, and still drawing idealists from across the world. But it's the distance between the founding vision and the lived reality that earns it a place on this list. Next up, a settlement even harder to categorize. 220 people sharing one single building. A city so perfect that nobody wanted to live in it. That is not a thought experiment or a parable. It is the actual history of Palmanova, a Renaissance fortress town in northeastern Italy that had to be populated with pardoned criminals because no free person would voluntarily settle there. It ranks 10th on our list, and its story is one of the most revealing case studies in the long human struggle between ideal design and lived reality. Founded in 1593 by the Venetian Republic on the plains of Friuli, Palmanova was conceived as the ultimate military installation of its age. The architects, most likely Vincenzo Scamozzi and Buonaiuto Lorini, engineered a 9-pointed star fortress with concentric rings of streets radiating outward from a central hexagonal piazza. Every bastion was positioned to provide covering fire for the bastions on either side, leaving no dead angle where an enemy could shelter from cannon or musket. The geometry was not decorative, it was a weapons system. Every line, every angle, every street served the logic of defense. And that was precisely the problem. The same ruthless efficiency that made Palmanova impregnable made it unbearable. Streets that led only inward toward the center or outward toward the walls offered no room for the accidental, the organic, the human. There were no winding alleys, no neighborhoods that had grown messily over generations, no corners that belonged to no one in particular. The city was a machine, and living inside a machine, it turns out, is psychologically suffocating. Venice spent decades offering tax exemptions and financial incentives to attract settlers. Decades of failure followed. In 1625, the Republic resorted to the solution that history has never quite let it forget. It granted pardons to convicted criminals on the condition that they make Palmanova their home. Today, the city is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, its star-shaped outline from the air as flawless as the day it was drawn. Almost nothing has disturbed its original plan. That preservation is remarkable and quietly ironic because what it preserves is evidence of a fundamental miscalculation. The architects solved every military variable and forgot the one that mattered most. Human beings do not inhabit geometry, they inhabit places, with all the contradiction and imperfection that word implies. Almost every resident of Whittier, Alaska, lives under the same roof. Not the same neighborhood, not the same block, the same building. That single fact is the starting point for understanding why Whittier sits at number 9 on our list. The Begich Tower is a 14-story concrete structure originally built by the United States Army during the Cold War as part of a military installation on the Kenai Peninsula. When the military withdrew, the building didn't empty out, it transformed. Today it functions as a self-contained town, residential apartments, a post office, a police station, a church, a grocery store, a medical clinic, a laundromat, and a school, all within the same walls. Children attend class without stepping outside. Elderly residents sometimes go weeks without leaving the building at all. The reasons become obvious the moment you look at the environment surrounding it. Outside, the Prince William Sound stretches towards snow-covered mountains that hold their white for most of the year. The climate here is genuinely hostile, up to 27 consecutive days of precipitation in a single month, ferocious winds, and a winter darkness that lasts nearly around the clock. Access to Whittier is limited to one route, the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, roughly 4 kilometers long and wide enough for a single lane. Traffic alternates directions on a fixed schedule. At night, the tunnel closes entirely. There is no other way in or out. That tunnel is not a symbol of isolation. It is isolation made physical, built into the infrastructure of daily life, which raises a question the place refuses to let you ignore. At what point does a tight-knit community become something you cannot leave? The neighbors are inescapable. The neighborhood cannot be changed. The exit has a closing time. And still, people stay. People come back. The Begich Tower became a fortress, not against enemies, but against the wilderness and the particular loneliness of the far north. The next place on our list was also built as a fortress, in the most literal sense. Geometrically flawless, mathematically precise, designed to project perfect order, which is exactly why no one wanted to live there. The Villages, Florida, ranks number 8 on our list, and it holds a distinction that no retirement community in the world can match. It is simultaneously the largest, the most meticulously designed, and arguably the most socially explosive concentration of elderly people on the planet. Start with the shock of the numbers. More than 115,000 residents, every single one of them over 55, spread across 3 Florida counties. Over 60,000 golf carts moving through a dedicated road network built in parallel to the regular streets. Hundreds of restaurants and bars where the average customer is 70 years old. Live music on the central squares every single night of the year. No children, no noise, no mess. The place was engineered as a total leisure environment, a city-sized machine for managed happiness in old age. And then the statistics arrived that made national headlines.
The Villages turned out to be one of the highest per capita alcohol consumption communities in the entire United States. More startling still, public health researchers identified it as one of the country's most significant hotspots for sexually transmitted infections among older adults. The explanation, when sociologists gave it, was almost uncomfortably logical. Take thousands of people who are wealthy, unencumbered by work, physically mobile, and, crucially, finally free from the social reputation pressures that governed every decision of their adult lives. Place them in a space designed for permanent leisure with no external friction. The behavior that follows is not aberration. It is what happens when the architecture removes every break. What makes the Villages visually arresting is precisely its uniformity. Endless rows of identical pastel houses, immaculate lawns, streets that could be stage sets. The perfection is the point. This was not a city built towards some imagined future. It was a city built to harvest a very specific, very profitable past. That tension between the utopia it advertises and the social reality it produces is the same question waiting for us in the next stop on this journey. There is a city in the middle of the Caspian Sea with no land beneath it. That sentence should not be possible, and yet Neft, oil rocks, has existed since 1949, 42 kilometers from the Azerbaijani coast, standing on water. It ranks 7th on our list, and the reason is simple. Nothing about it should work, and almost everything did. The explanation begins with an act of deliberate destruction. Soviet engineers needed a foundation where none existed, so they sank 7 aging vessels to create one. Those sunken hulls became the base for a web of steel trestles stretching nearly 200 kilometers, linking hundreds of platforms into a single functioning settlement. The engineering logic was brutal and effective. Use what you have, even if what you have is old ships and open sea. What followed was stranger than the construction itself. The Soviet state did not build an offshore drilling camp. It built a city, and it meant that word seriously. At peak capacity, over 5,000 people lived here. There was a cinema, a bakery, a hospital. There was a park with actual trees, and the soil those trees grew in was shipped from the mainland. Read that detail again. Soil, transported by boat, spread on steel platforms above the Caspian, because a Soviet worker, apparently, required a park. That imported earth is the most precise fact about what Neft actually was. It reveals a system that didn't merely want to extract oil from the sea, it wanted to prove that the sea was no obstacle to normal life, that any environment could be normalized, domesticated, made to resemble everywhere else. The trestles and platforms were industrial infrastructure. The park, with its shipped-in soil, was ideology made physical.
Much of that infrastructure has since failed. Sections of the trestle network have collapsed or subsided into the water. The city still functions, but at a shadow of its former scale. What remains raises the obvious question: if humanity can plant trees on the open sea, what happens when it applies the same totalizing logic to cities on land? Places engineered to contain every variable, eliminate every accident, and leave no square meter unaccounted for. The largest holiday resort ever built never hosted a single guest. That is the central fact about Prora, and everything else follows from it. Stretching 4.5 kilometers along the Baltic coast of Rügen Island, 8 stories tall, thousands of windows facing the sea, this concrete monolith ranks 6th on our list and stands as the most ambitious, unfinished architectural project of Nazi Germany. The logic behind it made perfect sense inside the ideology that produced it. In 1936, Hitler personally approved the construction of a mass resort under the Kraft durch Freude program, Strength Through Joy, a Nazi initiative designed to demonstrate that the regime cared about the leisure of the German working class. Architect Clemens Klotz drew up 8 identical blocks joined into one continuous seafront strip, every room with a sea view, 20,000 people at once. The goal was not recreation in any ordinary sense. It was the industrialization of happiness, rest as a state function, pleasure as a tool of political loyalty. Construction halted in 1939 when the war began, and the building was repurposed almost immediately. Barracks, military hospital, storage. After the war, Soviet forces took control and sealed it off as a military base until German reunification. Since then, part of the complex has been converted into upmarket apartments and a hostel. But most of the facade remains exactly as it was left. Grey, flat, unbroken. What makes Prora more than a curiosity is what it represents in concrete form. The belief that joy could be engineered from above. That happiness was a design problem the state had already solved. The sea did not care. It still does not. Number 5 on our list is a capital city with a 20-lane highway that carries almost no traffic. That detail alone tells you everything you need to know about Naypyidaw. In most of the world, a new capital is built to consolidate power, project ambition, or simply house a growing government. Naypyidaw was built to hide from people, specifically from its own citizens. That distinction matters because it explains why this city of manicured lawns, working fountains, and open shopping malls feels less like a metropolis and more like a film set with no production in progress. The decision came in 2005. Myanmar's military junta, led by General Than Shwe, ordered the capital moved overnight from Rangoon to a patch of jungle in the country's interior, a place that had nothing before, no infrastructure, no population, no reason to exist as a city. Officials and military personnel were relocated in convoys without prior warning. The move was planned in total secrecy. One widely reported explanation traces it back to Than Shwe's personal astrologer, who allegedly warned him of an imminent invasion from the sea. The dictator responded by driving the entire apparatus of government as deep inland as possible, away from the coast and away from any concentration of ordinary Burmese life. What was built there operates on a scale that resists comprehension. Naypyidaw covers an area 4 times the size of London. Its central highway has 20 lanes. Government functions are spread across zones, separated by distances that make walking between them pointless. Ministries, military barracks, a hotel district, the parliamentary complex, each cluster isolated from the next by kilometers of nearly empty road. The streets are lit at night, the grass is cut. The escalators in the shopping centres run continuously past empty storefronts. There is a zoo, there is a golf course, the fountains operate on schedule. None of this is neglect, none of it is decay. Naypyidaw is the physical architecture of authoritarian anxiety. The greater the distance between ruler and ruled, the safer the ruler feels. Every extra lane on that highway, every kilometre between ministries,
Every empty boulevard is a deliberate design choice. A capital built not to serve a population, but to insulate power from one. Number 4 on our list is a place that has no running water, no sewage system, no police force, and no mailing address, and has been continuously inhabited for decades. Slab City, located in the southeastern California desert near the slowly dying Salton Sea, is not a failed settlement. It is, by the account of the people who live there, the last free city in America. The origin is purely military and entirely accidental. In 1956, the United States Marine Corps decommissioned Camp Dunlap, a training base in the Sonoran Desert a few hours east of Los Angeles. They took the equipment, the personnel, and everything above ground level. What they left behind were the reinforced concrete foundations, the slabs, sitting flat and empty in the desert heat. No walls, no roofs, no utilities, just geometry. Over the following years, those slabs became the foundation for something the Marines never planned. A community built entirely outside the systems that define modern urban life. Veterans who had nowhere to return to. Artists who wanted space without rent. Drifters, recluses, and people who had, for various reasons, decided that the conventional bargain of civilization was not worth the price. They parked their trailers on the concrete and stayed. Today, the population swells to around 4,000 in winter when the desert is bearable. In summer, temperatures regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius and the population drops to a fraction of that. Those who remain push the boundaries of what the human body can sustain without mechanical cooling. The visual landscape is dense and deliberate. Rusted trailers, improvised solar panels, assemblage sculptures, and dominating everything, Salvation Mountain. Leonard Knight spent over 30 years building a 3-story hill from adobe clay, straw, and paint, covering it with Bible verses and floral patterns in colors that have no business existing in a desert. Knight died in 2014. The mountain did not. It stands as the most honest monument to what Slab City actually is. Ungoverned, unplanned, and completely serious about its own existence. The question the place forces is architectural and political at once. Does a city need infrastructure, or does it only need people? Up next, we examine what happens when infrastructure exists, but the people vanish. Number 3 on our list is a place that shouldn't exist, not by any reasonable measure of human logic. Aogashima sits in the Pacific Ocean, 358 kilometers south of Tokyo. It is, technically, part of Japan. It has a post office, a village office, roughly 170 residents. But the moment you see it from the air, every familiar category dissolves. The island is a volcano inside a volcano. The outer rim, an ancient caldera, rises up to 200 meters, its walls so steep and so densely forested they look almost architectural. And inside that natural fortress, cradled at the bottom of the caldera floor, a second volcanic cone pushes upward. That inner peak is called Maruyama. It is younger, it is active, and the village sits in the space between them, between ancient geological violence and the possibility of more. This is not a theoretical risk. In 1781, the volcano erupted. The eruption lasted years. The entire population was evacuated to the main islands of Japan. They waited, and then, roughly 50 years later, they came back to the same island, the same slopes, the same ground that had driven them away. They rebuilt. What they returned to was also, in its way, a gift. Geothermal vents called hishiki rise from the earth across the island. And the residents use them to cook food, to heat water, to live alongside the heat rather than fear it. The volcano that threatens them also sustains them. Getting there requires either a helicopter or a ship. The ship cancels in bad weather roughly half the time. This is not an overstatement. Aogashima is among the most inaccessible inhabited places in all of Japan. From above, it looks like science fiction. A green crater within a crater, steam drifting from the earth, small houses on the inner slopes, and beyond the ancient walls, nothing but open ocean in every direction. But Aogashima is isolation shaped by geology. What comes next on our list is something different entirely. Isolation shaped by choice, by ideology, by walls that were built not by nature, but by people who wanted them there. A community of 60,000 people, with no industrial machinery and no government contract, outperforms the recycling rates of virtually every municipal waste system in the developed world. That is not a projection or an aspiration. That is what happens every day in Manshiyat Nasser, known outside Egypt as Garbage City, number 2 on our list. Manshiyat Nasser sits at the southeastern edge of Cairo, pressed against the limestone cliffs of the Mukattam Plateau. Its residents are the Zabaleen, a Coptic Christian community whose relationship with the city's waste stretches back generations. Every morning, their trucks fan out across Cairo's streets. By afternoon, they return loaded. What happens next is the part that surprises researchers and urban planners every time they examine it. Roughly 85% of everything collected gets recycled. Organic matter goes to pigs, paper is baled, metal is melted down, plastic is sorted by hand, category by category, piece by piece. The knowledge that makes this possible is not written in manuals. It is passed from parents to children inside the neighborhood's households. In 2003, Egyptian authorities decided to modernize Cairo's waste collection and awarded contracts to international companies. The Zabaleen were cut out of the formal system. The replacement operators achieved recycling rates of around 20%. Within a few years, the experiment was acknowledged as a failure and the Zabaleen were brought back in. What that episode exposed is something urban economists find genuinely difficult to model. Efficiency, built entirely on embedded, community-held knowledge, cannot simply be replicated by importing equipment and signing contracts. The infrastructure here is human, and it took decades to develop. Above the neighborhood, carved directly into the Mukattam rock face, stands the cave church of St. Simon the Tanner. Its amphitheatre seats up to 20,000 people. Biblical scenes are etched into the limestone walls. By most estimates, it is the largest Christian place of worship in the entire Middle East, built by the same community the city preferred not to see. The next entry on our list also centres on an idea that proved stronger than the systems designed to contain it. For decades, one of the most densely populated places on Earth had no functioning government, no building codes, and no police presence to speak of. And people lived there by the tens of thousands. Kowloon walled city is number 1 on our list, and the reason it exists at all comes down to a legal accident that nobody bothered to fix. When Britain leased the new territories from China in 1898, a small military fort inside the perimeter was left under nominal Chinese sovereignty. Chinese officials withdrew in 1899. British authorities never moved in. The result was a jurisdictional void, a patch of land measuring 119 by 213 meters in the heart of colonial Hong Kong, where neither Chinese nor British law meaningfully applied. The triads recognized the opportunity before anyone else did. Over the following decades, unregulated construction filled every available square meter, then kept going upward. By the time the city reached its peak, somewhere between 33,000 and 50,000 people were living inside 330 interconnected buildings, some rising 14 stories high. The population density was, by any recorded measure, the highest in human history. Lower floors never saw daylight. Residents crossed between buildings across rooftops because the alleyways below had long since been swallowed by pipes, cables, and ventilation ducts. Unlicensed dentists, doctors, and restaurants operated openly, filling needs that licensed institutions had no interest in serving. Poverty and resourcefulness occupied the same narrow corridors. In 1993, Britain and China agreed to demolish the settlement. A park was built in its place. What Kowloon walled city leaves behind is not ruins, but a question. When human need is urgent enough and authority absent enough, what does a city actually become? 13 cities, 0 of them work the way they were supposed to. That's not a coincidence, it's a pattern. And it tells us something uncomfortable about the gap between designing a place to live and actually living there. Consider the evidence. Tianducheng reproduced Paris down to the last cornice and ended up as a ghost town with a fake Eiffel Tower. Brøndby-Haverby locked neighbours into geometrically perfect circles of garden plots, assuming proximity would produce community. It didn't. Auroville built a spiritual city of the future and spent decades arguing about who gets to define it. Palmanova was so flawlessly star-shaped that nobody wanted to walk its streets. Whittier, Alaska, put an entire town under one roof and found that a shared ceiling doesn't make people neighbours. The villages sold the fantasy of permanent leisure to the over 55s and got exactly the social dynamics you'd expect from a place where mortality is the unspoken subject.
The oil rocks were hammered into the Caspian Sea because the oil was there, not on land, and a city followed the drilling rig. Prora was engineered for 20,000 vacationers and never hosted a single one. Naypyidaw was built across 4 times the area of London, deliberately emptied of organic life, because a dictator needed a capital that projected power and feared accountability. Slab City stripped away every rule and survived on the margins, depending on how you count surviving. Aogashima put people inside a volcano and they stayed, because belonging somewhere is stronger than geological common sense. Manshiyat Nasser turned Cairo's refuse into construction material and carved one of the largest churches in the Middle East out of a garbage mountain. And then there is Kowloon walled city, the densest human settlement ever recorded, built by nobody, governed by nobody, and somehow alive. The next episode contains something equally hard to accept as real. Stay with us.